Imagine! The courier arrives at midnight, breathing hard. His message: the Persian army has moved. It has circled behind you. Darius III, King of Kings, commanding between 50,000 and 100,000 soldiers, has threaded through the Amanus passes, seized the city of Issus, and killed the Macedonian sick and wounded left there. The box is shut. Sea on one side, mountains on the other, a Persian force to the north. Every general expects the order to hold. Alexander orders the army to march toward Darius. Through the night, neither king planned to fight at Issus. The battle emerged from moves neither fully controlled. A year earlier, Alexander had broken Persian forces at the Granicus, then turned south along the coast, rather than driving at the empire's interior. His target was the Persian navy's harbour network. Port by port, he was severing the fleet's logistical routes. Persia assigned the war to Memnon of Rhodes, a Greek mercenary who knew exactly how to fight a Macedonian. He avoided pitched battle, raided into the Aegean, threatened Alexander's supply lines. Then Memnon died of illness. Suddenly, the counteroffensive died with him. Darius assembled his response at imperial scale: cavalry from Bactria, Parthia and the Scythian borderlands, infantry from Armenia and Mesopotamia, Greek mercenary hoplites hired specifically to hold a line against the Macedonian phalanx. The royal household travelled with the army, power made visible. Both columns converged on Syria. Alexander reached Issus first, left his casualties, and pressed south. Darius cut through the northern passes, emerged behind the Macedonian column, and found the wounded camp. He had them executed. The courier rode south. The night march changed what followed. By turning back, Alexander was not reacting. He was choosing the ground. The plain near the Pinarus River was barely 5 kilometers across. The Gulf of Issus closed the western edge. The Amanus mountains sealed the east. On open ground, Darius's numerical advantage was decisive. At this width, it nearly ceased to matter. The rear ranks of a vast army could only push forward against the men ahead. Numbers became pressure without direction. Darius had brought a weapon built for open plains into a corridor. Before the army descended, Alexander rode along his line. He called his officers by name. He cited their victories together. He reminded the Greek allies what Persian power had done to their ancestors' cities. He told the mercenaries this was the day their pay would justify itself. Then he positioned himself on the right, at the head of the companion cavalry, where he always fought. Visible, in front, the Macedonian deployment was engineered for this terrain. At the centre, 9,000 Sarissa-armed phalangites whose 18-foot pikes created a hedge of iron that halted anything without cavalry support. The hypaspists flanked them on both sides, 3,000 elite infantry who could anchor a line or accelerate into a gap as the moment required. The left flank facing the heaviest Persian cavalry fell to Parmenion, the Salian horsemen whose assignment was containment. Absorb. Hold. Grant Alexander time to work on the right. Alexander commanded the right personally. The companions. The strike. Across the Pinarus, Darius arranged his counter. Greek mercenary infantry, the finest heavy infantry coin could procure, were placed along the riverbank opposite the Macedonian phalanx. Hoplites against sarissas. It was the one position Darius could fill with troops who would not flinch at the sight of the pikes. Behind them, Persian infantry in depth, massed but constrained by terrain, into columns that could push but not spread. On the right, toward the sea, the heavy cavalry, the stronger flank. On the left, opposite Alexander, lighter forces. That imbalance would shape everything that followed. Persian archers opened first, composite bows releasing in waves, arrows darkening the air above the advancing Macedonian columns. The phalanx absorbed losses and kept moving. The sarissa hedge discouraged anyone from closing to finish the wounded. On the right, Alexander did not allow the archery to set a tempo. He drove the companions across the Pinarus at an oblique angle, not straight in, but cutting inward to compress the Persian left before it could reinforce or extend. The archers on that flank had no time to reset. The cavalry arrived before the second volley. The companion charge broke the Persian left immediately. Alexander drove through the first formation and kept moving, striking the second before it could establish depth. The Persian left folded. but the battle remained undecided. At the centre, the phalanx had crossed the river under arrow fire and struck the Greek mercenaries. Professional infantry against professional infantry, no gap to exploit. The centre ground to a halt. On the left, Parmenion was absorbing Persian cavalry at the shoreline, holding, barely. 3 simultaneous crises and only one force to solve them. With the Persian left broken, Alexander did not pursue. Pursuit was the instinct. He suppressed it. He wheeled the companions inward, hard left, into the exposed flank of the Persian centre. The Greek mercenaries there had been fighting the phalanx head-on. They had no formation prepared for cavalry arriving from the side. The Hypaspis drove into the gap simultaneously. The centre, which had been winning, was suddenly fighting on 2 fronts, then surrounded. Then it broke. A gap opened in the centre. Through the wreckage, through the dust and retreating ranks, Alexander saw the royal standard. The golden chariot of Darius III. What happened next appears in multiple ancient sources with unusual consistency. Darius watched his centre come apart, saw the companion cavalry driving through the rubble toward his position, and turned his chariot. He left while his army still fought. Word travelled through tens of thousands in seconds. Men who had stood their ground, who had been fighting well, who had no military reason to break, broke. Because what they were defending had departed. Alexander gave chase for 25 miles before darkness closed the pursuit. Darius escaped with a small retinue. His army did not. At the Persian camp, the royal treasury, the court's belongings, and Darius's family. His mother Sisygambis, his wife Statira, his daughters. Sisygambis prostrated herself before the taller of the 2 men who entered the tent. Hephaestion, believing him the king, told of her mistake. She was overcome. Alexander told her she had made no error. Hephaestion was also Alexander. They would be treated as royalty, not as prizes. Macedonian losses numbered in the hundreds. Persian and mercenary dead ran to tens of thousands, most falling during the rout. But Issus was not decided by arithmetic. Darius remained alive. The Achaemenid East, its revenues, its armies, its satrapies, was untouched. 3 major engagements lay ahead. What Issus shattered was not the empire. It was the presumption of Persian invincibility. Darius had brought his family to witness his final victory over this Macedonian. He had fled without them. Alexander's treatment of Darius's family was calculated and deliberate. A conqueror who brutalizes captive royals announces his intention to destroy. One who treats them as his own announces something more unsettling, that he intends to replace. He was not simply defeating Persia, he was auditioning to rule it. Issus gave Alexander the eastern Mediterranean coastline. With Darius's family as leverage and the Persian treasury as fuel, the campaign could continue indefinitely. Alexander turned south. Tyre lay ahead, an island fortress that had never fallen, protected by walls and 2 miles of open water. It would test whether Issus was a moment of fortune or proof of something permanent. He would answer in 7 months, with an engineering feat that had no precedent and left no doubt about what kind of general he was.